The thumping started again. A dull, rhythmic drag thump from the ceiling. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, the delicate bristles of the squirrel hair brush hovering a millimeter above the cracked varnish of the 17th century portrait. Her focus, once a pinpoint of crystalline silence, shattered. For 3 weeks, she'd endured the noises from the new tenant in the penthouse. At first, it was music, thudding bass that vibrated through her floorboards. Then came the shouting, muffled but sharp. Now this dragging. It sounded like someone was moving furniture. Very heavy, very dead furniture. She set the brush down, her breath a frustrated hiss. Her studio apartment, her sanctuary of quiet precision, had become the lower level of a frat house run by a poltergeist. She'd left notes. Polite ones, then passive-aggressive ones, then one that was basically a diagram of the city's noise ordinance bylaws. Nothing. Tonight was the last straw. This restoration was for Mr. Alastair, her mentor and the gallery owner who gave Maya her first real job. It was a high-profile piece, and the deadline was suffocating. She couldn't work like this. Decision made, she stood, her joints cracking in protest. She was still in her work clothes, a paint-smeared gray hoodie, soft leggings, and a pair of worn, fluffy bunny slippers. She glanced at her reflection in the dark window. A 23-year-old art restorer about to declare war on a mob boss. Okay, probably not a mob boss. Probably just a tech bro with a Peloton and a deep-seated hatred of his downstairs neighbors. Still, it felt biblical. She stalked out of her apartment and took the elevator up to the penthouse. The hallway here was different. Cool marble instead of worn carpet, recessed lighting instead of flickering fluorescence. The air smelled of money and ozone. She strode to the door, took a deep, fortifying breath, and hammered on it with the flat of her hand. Silence. The dragging stopped. Then, the slick, silent click of a high-end lock. The door swung inward. The man standing there was not a tech bro. He was tall, carved from something harder than stone, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than her degree. His face was a masterpiece of sharp angles and unnerving stillness, his dark eyes holding an ancient, predatory calm. Behind him, a second man, built like a refrigerator, stood with his arms crossed. He had a scar that bisected his eyebrow. "Can I help you?" The tall one's voice was a low, smooth baritone. English, but with the clipped, precise edges of a native Korean speaker. Maya's prepared speech about civic duty and common courtesy evaporated. Her brain rebooted, landing on pure, unadulterated rage. She pointed a finger at him. "You." The noise. "Are you redecorating? At 11 o'clock at night? With what, boulders?" The man's expression didn't change. Not a flicker. It was like yelling at a statue. He glanced down at her bunny slippers, then back to her face. A ghost of something, amusement? Disbelief? Passed through his eyes. "There was a spill," he said, the word chosen with deliberate care. "A spill? Did you spill a grand piano down a flight of stairs?" She took a step closer, fueled by weeks of frustration. That's when she saw it. On the pristine marble floor just inside his doorway, a fan of $100 bills. A lot of them. And next to them, a dark, reddish-brown smear that was definitely not wine. Her brain did a frantic calculation. Noise complaints. Shouting. Money on the floor. A stain that looked suspiciously like. She stopped that thought. Nope. Her neighbor was just a messy, rich jerk. That was the only acceptable reality. She bent down, scooped up the wad of cash, and shoved it into his chest. His suit was cool and unyielding. "I don't want your money. I want you to learn what a floor is for. It's for walking on. Quietly." He didn't take the money. His gaze was fixed on her face, intense and analytical, as if he were cataloging every fleck of paint on her cheek. The refrigerator-sized man behind him tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Dae-ho," the tall man said, his voice soft but absolute. The other man subsided instantly. He finally took the cash from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was like a static shock, a jolt of unexpected heat. He didn't look at the money. He just looked at her. "It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," she snapped, her bravery a rapidly dwindling resource. She turned on her heel and marched back to the elevator, the burning sensation of his stare following her all the way. The door slid shut, and she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could have laughed. A mob boss. Her neighbor was an actual mob boss, and she had thrown money at his feet in bunny slippers. She was either going to be his next victim or the subject of a very strange, very short documentary. Minjun watched the elevator doors close, the crumpled bills still warm in his hand. He could feel the faint imprint of her fingers on the paper. For the first time in a decade, he was at a complete loss. Daeho stepped forward, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect.
Sir.
Should you what, Daeho? Minjun asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Follow the woman in the rabbit slippers and discipline her for demanding basic consideration? She touched you, Daeho stated, as if this were a crime on par with treason. She yelled at you. She did, Minjun agreed. He looked at the smear on the floor, the last trace of the traitor who had been selling information to Petrov's crew. The man had begged, then bargained, then bled. It had been a tedious, predictable affair. And then, in the middle of the cleanup, a furious, paint-splattered woman with fire in her eyes had hammered on his door and treated him not like the head of the Golden Chrysanthemum Syndicate, but like an inconsiderate upstairs neighbor. It was refreshing. He had built his entire life on a foundation of fear and control.
People didn't look him in the eye.
They spoke in whispers. They anticipated his needs, his moods, his violent capabilities. They never, ever, showed up at his door in a stained hoodie to complain about noise. He looked at the money in his hand. Her hand had been small, but her grip was firm. There was a fleck of cerulean blue paint on her thumbnail. He'd noticed the way her frayed hoodie smelled faintly of turpentine and lavender soap. He'd noticed the defiant jut of her chin and the sheer, unadulterated nerve that propelled her. She wasn't afraid of him. Not really. She was annoyed, irritated. The danger he represented was secondary to her need for a quiet workspace. Find out who she is, Minjun said, turning back into the apartment. Everything. Her name, her job, what she had for breakfast this morning. I want to know the name of the company that made those ridiculous slippers.
Daeho blinked.
Sir? You heard me. Minjun walked over to the wide expanse of windows overlooking the city. The lights glittered below, a kingdom he controlled with an iron fist. He had fortresses, safe houses, armies of men who would die for him. But none of it had prepared him for the woman from 12B. She was an anomaly, a variable he hadn't accounted for. In his world of predators and prey, of calculated risks and brutal certainties, she was something else entirely. Something authentic. He had spent his life acquiring beautiful, priceless things. Art, property, power. But they were all cold, dead objects. The woman from downstairs was alive in a way that made everything else in his sterile world feel like a forgery. And Daeho, he said, his back still to the room. Ensure the penthouse is silent from now on. Not a sound. If I drop a pin, I expect you to catch it before it hits the floor. Yes, sir, Daeho said, the confusion clear in his voice. Minjun looked down at his own hand, half expecting to see the ghost of her touch. He had built walls around himself so high and so thick that no one could get in. He had never considered that someone might just knock on the door and demand he keep the noise down. He wasn't angry. He was captivated. And in Minjun's world, captivation was the most dangerous emotion of all. It was the first step toward obsession. The silence was, impossibly, worse than the noise. For 2 days, not a single sound came from the penthouse. No music, no dragging, no footsteps. It was as if the apartment above her had been jettisoned into space. The utter quiet was so profound it felt unnatural, a void that pressed down on her. Maya found herself straining to hear a cough, a drop spoon, anything. It was deeply unnerving. She tried to focus on her work. The portrait for Mr. Alistair was fighting her. It was supposed to be a minor work by a student of Rembrandt, but something felt off. The craquelure, the fine pattern of cracking in the paint, seemed too uniform, too perfect. The underdrawing she'd glimpsed with infrared reflectography was hesitant, lacking the confident strokes of a master's pupil. It felt new, a clever fake. She'd mentioned her suspicions to Alistair, but he'd brushed them off impatiently. "Just clean it, Maya," he'd said, his usual avuncular warmth replaced by a strange tension. "The client is very eager. Don't go inventing problems." The conversation had left a sour taste in her mouth. Alistair had always encouraged her meticulous eye, her instinct for authenticity. Now he was telling her to ignore it. A buzz from the front desk interrupted her thoughts. "Package for you, Ms. James." "I'll be right down." She traded her bunny slippers for sneakers, a concession to the possibility of running into her terrifyingly quiet neighbor, and went to the lobby. The package was a long, elegant box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single, perfect orchid. It was a Paphiopedilum rothschildianum, the gold of Kinabalu. Incredibly rare, notoriously difficult to cultivate, and breathtakingly expensive. Its striped petals arched like a predator's claws. There was no note. A cold dread trickled down her spine. This wasn't a secret admirer. This was a message. Orchids like this didn't just appear. They were sent by people with immense resources. People who lived in silent penthouses. She carried the box back to her apartment as if it were a bomb. She set it on her kitchen counter, where it looked alien and menacing among her jars of pigment and half-empty mugs of tea. It was a beautiful, threatening thing. A warning and a gift. It felt like ownership. She was staring at it, her mind racing, when her phone rang. It was her father. "Hey, sweetie," he said, his voice too bright, too cheerful. It was his tell. "What do you need, Dad?" she asked, her weariness a heavy cloak. "Just calling to see how my brilliant daughter is doing. You know, I was just telling a friend of mine about you, how you're the best art restorer in the city," he rambled on, the preamble to the inevitable request for money. His gambling addiction was a chronic illness, and she was his unwilling, exhausted nurse. "I can't, Dad," she said, cutting him off.
I'm sorry.
I can't this month." The silence on the other end was heavy with disappointment and a familiar, cutting guilt. "All right, Maya. I understand. Don't worry about your old man." He hung up, leaving her with the orchid, the suspicious painting, and the weight of her father's failures. She felt trapped, threads of obligation and fear weaving a net around her. She looked up at the ceiling. The silence from above was no longer just quiet. It was attentive. It was the sound of a spider wading in its web. Minjun reviewed the file on his tablet. Maya James, 23, top of her class at the Courtauld Institute, specialized in Old Master restoration. Father, David James, a history professor with a gambling debt of over $200,000, mostly to loan sharks connected to the Petrov Bratva. Her mother was deceased. She had no other family. He swiped to the next page. A photo of her, smiling, at her graduation. She looked younger, carefree, untouched by the filth of his world. He had sent the orchid, the gold of Kinabalu. It was said to only bloom for those who were worthy. He found the sentiment absurd, but the flower itself, its fierce, delicate beauty, reminded him of her. A rare thing thriving in an inhospitable environment. Daeho entered the room, placing a cup of tea on the table beside him. "The surveillance on her is in place. Petrov's men are still sniffing around her boss, Alistair Finch. Finch is a fool," Minjun said without looking up from the tablet. "He's using his gallery to launder Petrov's money, moving forgeries as authentic pieces to clean the cash." He zoomed in on a detail in the file. A manifest for an upcoming auction. It listed a piece. Follower of Rembrandt, portrait of a merchant. The estimated value was 7 figures. "This is the painting she's working on. It's a fake. Of the highest quality. Finch needs a reputable restorer to sign off on its condition report. It legitimizes the forgery. He's using her expertise, her good name, to commit fraud for our enemies." The cold, quiet rage he'd been holding in check began to solidify. Petrov wasn't just encroaching on his territory. He was using her. Unacceptable. "What are your orders, sir?" Daeho asked, his voice steady. He was used to Minjun's cold furies. "Petrov thinks he's being clever, moving into the art world. He thinks it's clean, untouchable. He's wrong." Minjun stood and walked to the window. He could see the roof of Maya's gallery building several blocks away. Alistair Finch made a deal with the wrong devil, and he put her in the middle of it. She thinks her biggest problem is her father's debt. She has no idea the kind of danger she's in. He thought of her in his doorway, all righteous anger and fluffy slippers. She was a restorer. She stripped away layers of grime and deceit to find the truth underneath. It was a dangerous profession in a city built on lies. Her own boss, the man she trusted, was the one selling her out. The irony was bitter. She's a civilian, Daeho said, a rare note of caution in his voice. Bringing her into this. She is already in this. Minjun corrected him sharply. She was in it the moment Finch gave her that painting. The difference is, now I am in it, too. He would not allow Petrov to use her as a pawn. He would not allow her to be collateral damage in their war. He would extract her from the board completely. He would take the piece for himself. Keep the surveillance tight, he ordered. I want to know every move she makes. If one of Petrov's men so much as looks at her, I want his name. And what about her? Daeho asked. What is the objective? Minjun turned from the window, his eyes dark and resolute. The objective, he said, is to own the board. And everything on it he would protect her. And protection, in his world, was a form of possession. The feeling of being watched had become a permanent resident in the back of Maya's mind. It was a low-grade hum of anxiety that followed her from her apartment to the gallery, a prickling on her skin that made her look over her shoulder on empty streets. She told herself she was being paranoid, a side effect of dealing with silent mobsters and duplicitous bosses. Tonight, the feeling was screaming. She'd stayed late at the gallery, trying one last time to reconcile the painting's flaws with Alistair's insistence on its authenticity. She'd found it, a trace of zinc white, a pigment not commercially available until a century after the painting was supposedly made. It was definitive proof. A forgery. Her heart pounded with a sick mix of vindication and fear. Alistair had lied to her. He was knowingly trying to pass a fake. The question was why. She packed her bag, her hands trembling slightly, and left the gallery through the back service exit. The alley was dark, smelling of damp garbage and city exhaust. As she stepped onto the street, she saw it. A black town car, idling halfway down the block, its lights off. It didn't belong in this neighborhood of artist lofts and trendy cafes. Her paranoia flared into full-blown alarm. She turned and started walking quickly in the opposite direction. The car's engine rumbled to life. It didn't speed up. It paced her, a shark gliding through dark water. Panic seized her. She ducked into a side street, her sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. It was a dead end. A brick wall loomed in front of her. She was trapped. The town car pulled up, blocking the entrance to the alley. Two large men in cheap suits got out. They didn't hurry. They smiled, their faces shadowed and predatory. Mr. Petrov sends his regards, one of them said, his voice a gravelly Eastern European accent. He'd like to have a word with you about the painting. Maya's mind raced. Hairspray and a lighter. That's what you did in the movies. She had neither. She had a roll of archival tape and a very expensive pH-neutral deacidification spray. Not exactly a flamethrower. She backed away until her shoulders hit the cold, damp brick of the wall. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory, but in a grimy alley, all because of a stupid, fake painting. Suddenly, a second car, a silent, impossibly sleek black sedan, materialized at the mouth of the alley, boxing the town car in. Its headlights flared to life, blindingly bright. The driver's door opened and Daeho, the human refrigerator from the penthouse, unfolded himself from the car. He moved with a brutal, economic grace that was terrifying to watch. The two men from the town car turned, surprised. It was the last mistake they made. It was over in seconds, a blur of motion, two sickening crunches, and then two bodies slumped on the pavement. The back door of the sedan opened. Minjun was sitting in the shadows of the interior, untouched and unruffled. He looked from the unconscious men to her, his face an unreadable mask. "Get in the car, Maya," he said. It wasn't a request. She stared at him, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. Her rescuer, her neighbor, her keeper. No, the word was a pathetic whisper, the last gasp of her independence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. Those men work for a man named Petrov. He believes you know his secrets. They will not be the last he sends. The next ones will not be so easily discouraged. Your other option is to wait here for them to wake up. The choice is yours. But you need to make it now. The logic was cold, brutal, and inescapable. She was caught between two monsters, and one of them was offering her a ride. Trembling, she walked towards the car, every step a surrender. She slid into the plush leather seat, the door closing behind her with a heavy, final thud. The sound of a cage door swinging shut. The interior of the car was silent, save for the soft whisper of the climate control. Minjun watched her from the corner of his eye. She was huddled against the far door, as far from him as she could get. Her body was rigid with fear and adrenaline, her knuckles white where she gripped her bag. He could smell the faint scent of her fear, sharp and metallic, and it infuriated him. His rage was a cold, controlled thing, a block of ice in his chest. It was directed at Petrov, for his crudeness, for his recklessness in targeting a civilian. It was directed at Alistair Finch, for his greed. And a significant portion was directed at himself. He had miscalculated. He had assumed Petrov would be more subtle, that he would have more time to extricate her cleanly. He had failed to protect her from the initial contact, and that failure was a galling stain on his pride. He saw the tremor in her hands. The instinct to reach out, to offer some kind of comfort, was a foreign, unwelcome impulse. He dealt in control, not comfort. He built walls, he didn't tear them down. But seeing her fear, a fear he was indirectly responsible for, felt like a crack forming in his own carefully constructed fortress. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice tight. "My home," he replied. "It's the only place I can be certain you are safe." Safe. She let out a short, hysterical laugh. "I was safer before I met you. Before you started your one-man construction project over my head and sent me cryptic, threatening plants." He absorbed the accusation without flinching. "The orchid was not a threat. And the danger you are in has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the painting you are restoring for Alistair Finch." She went very still. "How do you know about that?" He chose his words carefully. Withholding information was a form of protection, a way to control the flow of a crisis. But with her, it felt like a betrayal. "Finch is laundering money for my rival, Petrov. The painting is a forgery he is using you to legitimize. The men in the alley were sent by Petrov to ensure your silence, or your cooperation." He watched her process the information. The fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. Then anger, bright and pure. "So you've been watching me," she said, her voice low. "My apartment.
My job.
You knew. You knew, and you just let me walk into this." "I was arranging to have you removed from the situation," he said, the words sounding hollow even to him. "My timeline was accelerated." He had never felt the need to explain himself to anyone, but with her, the silence felt like an admission of guilt. He had treated her like a strategic asset to be managed, not a person to be protected. And he could see in the hard set of her jaw that she knew it. Daeho pulled the car into the private underground garage of their building. The gate hissed shut behind them. They were back inside the fortress. He got out and opened her door. She didn't move. She just stared at him, her eyes dark with mistrust. He had saved her life, and in doing so, had earned her hatred. It was a transaction he was familiar with, but for the first time, it left him feeling bankrupt. His apartment was less a home and more a statement. It was a vast, two-story space of glass, steel, and polished concrete. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and looked profoundly uncomfortable. There were no photos, no books, no clutter. Not a single personal touch, except for one. On a stark, black marble counter that separated the kitchen from the living area sat her orchid. It was positioned under a small, specialized grow light, its strange, beautiful petals glowing. It looked perfectly cared for, thriving. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of anger and confusion through her. This man, this cold, clinical creature of violence, was tending her flower. The monster watered his plants. It was the most unsettling thing she had ever seen. "I'm not staying here," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You can't keep me here." "I can," he said simply, walking past her to a wet bar and pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass. He didn't offer her any. "And I will." Until Petrov is dealt with and you are no longer a target.
A target because of you, she shot back.
This is your world, your fight. I want no part of it. You lost that choice when your boss decided to do business with my enemies. He turned to face her, his expression unyielding. You are an expert in authenticity, Miss James. Surely you can appreciate the irony. You have been handling a forgery for a man you trusted, while the man you don't trust is the only one telling you the truth. His words hit their mark. The betrayal from Alistair was a fresh, gaping wound. The man who had nurtured her talent, who had acted like a surrogate father, had used her. He'd put her in the path of men like those in the alley. The thought made her feel sick.
And stupid.
So incredibly stupid. She had trusted the wrong person completely. She sank onto a low, gray sofa that felt as hard as a slab of rock. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, played by men she couldn't fight. Her independence, the one thing she cherished, was a laughable illusion. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, studying her. "For now, I want you to stay alive. And the only way to ensure that is to keep you here with me." It was a prison sentence delivered in a calm, reasonable tone. She looked around the beautiful, sterile cage he had brought her to. It was a world away from her own cozy, chaotic apartment, with its stacks of books, half-finished projects, and the lingering scent of oil paint.
Her home.
She felt a pang of longing so sharp it was a physical pain. He had her things. Daeho had mentioned it. He had already erased her. She noticed a painting on the wall, a dark, moody landscape. She stood and walked towards it, needing a distraction, something familiar. Her professional eye took over, a shield against her fear. The brushwork was too hesitant in the foreground. The composition was derivative. "This is a fake," she said, her voice flat. He came to stand beside her. He was too close, his presence a palpable force field of heat and danger. "I know," he said. "I bought it to remind myself that even things of great beauty can be built on lies." He was testing her. He was testing her skill, her eyes. He was assessing his new acquisition. The thought was chilling. She was just another object in his collection. A rare, difficult piece he had decided he wanted to own. Minjun watched her examine the painting. He had bought the forgery years ago, a reminder of a costly mistake from his youth when he had been fooled by a clever art dealer. It served as a lesson in vigilance. He had never shown it to anyone. Her immediate, unprompted identification of it as a fake was impressive. She saw the truth of things. It was her nature, an instinct he valued above all else. He had instructed Daeho to have her studio packed up and brought here. Her tools, her books, her half-finished canvases. He told himself it was practical. She would need things to occupy her time. It was also a strategic move, removing any reason for her to risk leaving. But a deeper, more honest part of him knew it was a possessive act. He wanted her world contained within his. He wanted to be the sole curator of her existence until the threat was gone. "Alistair," she said, her back still to him. "What happens to him?" "He will face consequences for his choices," Minjun said, the statement devoid of emotion.
It was a simple fact.
"And my father," she whispered, the words heavy with shame. "You know about his debts. To Petrov's people." "Yes." She finally turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of fury and humiliation. "Is that what this is? You buy me? You pay off his debt and I become what? The art expert in residence in your murder palace." The insult should have angered him. Instead, it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He saw himself through her eyes, a monster, a kidnapper, a collector of people. He had saved her, yes, but he had also stolen her life. His protection was a cage, and she was rightly beating against the bars. "Your father's debt will be handled," he said, his voice colder than he intended, a defense against the crack she was making in his composure. "It will no longer be a weapon they can use against you. You are not for sale. You are under my protection. There is a difference." "There is no difference," she cried, her voice breaking. "Not from where I'm standing. I had a life. I had a job, a home. You've taken all of that. You say you're protecting me, but it feels like you're just a more sophisticated brand of predator." Her words hung in the silent, sterile air between them. He had no counterargument. In his world, Protection and possession were two sides of the same coin. He had never needed to separate them. He had never wanted to, until now. He wanted her to look at him and see a savior, not a jailer. He wanted her to feel safe, not trapped. He wanted her to turn that fierce, analytical eye on him and see something worth authenticating. But he had gone about it all wrong. He had used the only tools he had: force, control, and containment. And in doing so, he had proven her right. He had to tell her the full truth. Not just about Alistair and the painting, but about the war he was fighting and why she was now at the very center of it. It was a risk. Information was a weapon, and giving it to her would be a form of surrender. He would be giving her the power to destroy him. Petrov is not just a rival, he began, his voice low. He's a cancer. He deals in human trafficking, fentanyl, things my organization does not touch. Your boss, Alistair, was not just laundering money. He was providing Petrov with a way to purchase legitimate businesses to move his poison and his people through the city. The painting was the key to it all. By proving it a fake, you would have derailed his entire operation. He wouldn't have just killed you, Maya. He would have made you disappear. Her face had gone pale. The reality of the danger, the sheer, ugly scale of it, was finally sinking in. This wasn't about a single painting.
It was about a war she had stumbled into.
I had two choices, he continued, taking a step closer. Let him take you, or take you myself. I chose the one that kept you breathing. She stared at him, her anger warring with a new, terrifying understanding. She was trembling again, but this time it was different. It was the aftershock of a near miss she hadn't even known she'd had. So what now? She whispered. I just live here? In your glass box? Until you decide it's safe. Yes. It was the only answer he could give. The only one that was true. He had brought her into his fortress. He had locked the gates. Now he had to face the reality that he was trapped in here with her. And he was no longer sure who was the captive and who was the guard. He had won the battle for her safety, but it felt, profoundly, like he was losing the war for everything else. He watched her sleep. She had eventually collapsed from emotional exhaustion, curling into a tight ball on the brutally minimalist sofa. She looked small and out of place, a splash of soft, worn humanity in his world of hard edges. Her gray hoodie was rumpled, and one bunny slipper had fallen to the floor. Minjun picked it up. It was absurdly soft, the fabric worn thin in places. He thought of her wearing them to confront him, a tiny, furious warrior in armor made of fleece. He set it down gently beside her. His phone vibrated with a message from Deho. Petrov's men hit the gallery. They didn't take anything. They just destroyed her workspace, slashed the canvases, smashed her tools. They left a message.
A cold, livet kom sættet over Mignon.
This was an escalation. Petrov wasn't just trying to recover from a failed transaction. He was being personal. He was attacking Minjun by attacking what belonged to him. By destroying her work, her sanctuary, he was sending a clear message. I can touch what you value.
Mignon looked at Maya's sleeping formiddag.
Petrov thought. He was attacking a weakness. He was wrong. He was awakening a dragon. For years, Minjun had managed his empire with surgical precision and cold logic. He met violence with controlled, proportional violence. He did not start wars. He finished them. But this was different. This was not business. The violation of her space, the deliberate destruction of her craft, felt like a physical assault on her, and by extension on him. He walked to the window. The city lights a cold fire below. He had brought her here to protect her, to keep her sterile and separate from the filth of his world. But the filth had followed. It had reached into the one place she felt safe, her studio, and defiled it. He had wanted to keep her untouched. A fantasy.
He saw that now.
To protect her, he couldn't keep her in a glass box. He had to eliminate the threat so completely that it could never cast a shadow on her life again. He would have to go to war. Not the cold, strategic war he was used to, but a hot, brutal, exterminating war. He would have to become the monster she already thought he was. He looked back at her, a fierce, possessive resolve hardening within him. He had taken her from her life to save it. Now, he would burn down the world of the man who had threatened her, and he would salt the earth so that nothing, and no one, could ever hurt her again. It was not about control anymore. It was not about protection in the abstract. It was about her, Maya. He had found the one thing in his life that was not a forgery. And he would pay any price, spill any amount of blood, to keep it authentic and whole. His obsession had found its purpose.